Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Living Beyond the Numbers podcast. I'm your host, Jude Boubeaux, here with our Director of Positivity, Caleb Arringdale.
Hello.
And then I've got a special guest with us today, one of our partners and senior financial planners from our Alaska office, Mike Branham. So, Mike, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, excited to have you on here today. And maybe we can start with just kind of share a little bit about how people often ask, like, you guys have an office in Alaska? Like, how did that happen? So maybe share a little bit of your journey and how we ended up with you being partners with you and in Alaska.
Yeah. So I don't know how far back we want to go. I started in financial services about 26 years ago. So 1999 for a major financial services company. Stayed there for a couple of years, and that led me to kind of switch over to the financial planning and fee only side. And I worked between two firms with the same person, but between two firms for it's probably close to 15 years. And in that time, I was in leadership within the Financial Planning Association and met Marty Kurtz and worked closely with him on the FPA board. And we developed a relationship. And about the time we both dropped off the board, or about the time I dropped off the board, he had been off a couple of years. He called me one day and said, "Hey, I have a friend in a study group who has a firm in Alaska and she'd like to retire. And it's really important to her that somebody with some experience in Alaska who's willing to move there or live there is part of this process. And I thought of you." And I was really happy with the firm that I was with. I had no intention of leaving, but I did say I'd sit in on some of those calls and just act as a guide for Marty. And through about 6 months of discussions, we talked about what it would look like and what they wanted to accomplish and everything else that was going on. And I decided to make the switch. So Marty bought this firm, or the planning center bought this firm in Alaska in 2015. I think the deal closed in 2016. I joined the planning center mid 2015. So July of 2015 was my birth date within the firm. And then for several years flew back and forth between the Twin Cities and Anchorage. Probably came every 6 weeks for 2 weeks and spent time here working with clients and getting to know them and dealing with the transition. With the intention was always for us to move here full time. That was the promise that we made, but we had two kids that were still in high school at the time, and uprooting their lives and moving them thousands of miles from kind of their social network and the groups that they had formed and the sports and activities that they were involved in didn't make any sense. So it was up to me really to travel and then come back. And then the goal was to move in 2020 after our youngest graduated high school. And of course, as we know, life had different ideas for us at that time. With the pandemic, it was a little hard to make that jump. So we waited until summer of 2021 and moved up here full time. And we've been here since, my wife and I. So.
Yeah. And if I remember right, that was part of your background. Like, y'all wasn't just, one day we'd like to live in Alaska. There was some connection beforehand.
Yeah. So coming out of high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I spent a lot of my life outdoors. And so I came to the University of Alaska Fairbanks for 2.5 years and went to school there. So I had lived in Alaska previously. I had a network here and a group of friends here that I was really close with. And so there was always that draw, that pull to come back to Alaska. I visited several times and always had that in the back of my mind. That'd be kind of cool to live here one day. And Julie, my wife, knew that, and she was somewhat interested in it. But we had initially thought about doing that long ago in my career. And then we started having children, and moving that far away from our regular kind of support network was not appealing to either of us. And so we built our lives and our careers in the Twin Cities where we had both grown up. And as fate would have it, or as life intervened, found ourselves back here, close to 20 years later anyway. So
you talked about that you really like being outdoors. What sort of things do you do? Because I think you have a really fascinating set of hobbies.
Yeah, I mean, anything outside. So we do a lot of fishing in the summer, as most Alaskans do. We do hunt in the fall, as most Alaskans do. We do a lot of hiking in the summer and getting outside, a lot of camping, just kind of typical things that your normal Alaska resident does. And we did a lot of those things when we lived in Minnesota too. I was pretty extensively visited the Boundary Waters canoe area in northern Minnesota, and we have a family cabin in northern Minnesota as well that I spent pretty much most of my formative years at. We lived there most summers, and then went back to the cities for school in the winter. So I've been doing things outside pretty much all of my life. It's where I probably feel most comfortable and where I enjoy myself the most. And as luck would have it, we all need jobs and to support families, and so we can't just spend all of our times in the woods. But here we are.
Yeah, and I think the big difference between maybe time spent in Alaska and the time spent maybe in the Midwest is, we might go fishing for an afternoon or, maybe do a little hike, but you'll go out for, is it a week long or 2 week long kind of moose expedition in many years, or you'll do these really extensive sort of trips that I think around here, that's just not really something that we frequently are able to do.
Yeah, so our moose camp is somewhere around 8 days is what our target is, travel and otherwise. We flew to Kodiak Island last year and did a goat hunt, and that was cut short by weather, but that was really supposed to be about a week. We got dropped off by a bush plane, and we were the only humans out there in that area for the time we were out there. So everything, just because of the vastness of the state of Alaska, there's no, like, if I drive from here to Fairbanks, that's 6 hours. You think about from New Orleans or the Quad Cities, where a 6 hour drive would take you. That's not even halfway up the state. So there's a lot of land and a lot of space to cover. And just to get where we're going takes a lot of time and effort. And quite frankly, it's not always easy. There's always stuff that goes wrong and things that got to be fixed. And you get pretty good at solving problems in the field. So.
A way, I think that speaks directly to financial planning. So do you find that, like, that time outdoors, or this, fact of, well, we've got a plan, but things will happen along the way. Like, if there are parallels, do you find this comes up in those conversations?
I think if you draw that analogy or metaphor, whichever we're speaking of, the reality is that life comes at you fast, and we always define financial planning as a process. Like, it's not something we sell. It's not a thing that we give. It's a process that we undertake with clients. And the reason that it's a process is because life happens fast. And so whatever our discussions center on today, we know that tomorrow the world can change that for us, either by things that we do or things that happen outside of our control. So, you think about being outside, or, from the point we leave our trucks and drive our UTVs into moose camp, there are obstacles and pitfalls and challenges that we're going to have to overcome that we haven't foreseen. We kind of know, but you just never know. Everything changes day to day. And I think the same is true in the work that we do with our clients, since, with respect to here's what we think the plan is, and then we need to make iterative changes along the way to deal with whatever the world or lives throw at us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So let's talk maybe a little bit then about kind of your work. So, you work with a lot of Gen X professionals, executives. What do you think are some differences you've noticed generationally about, how they might perceive financial planning or living the lives they want to live?
Yeah, it's interesting when you work with, whether it's the greatest generation or Gen X, Gen Y. I work with fewer Gen Z individuals, but we have some Generation 2 or Generation 3 clients that would fit that mold. And the world of possibilities that can be imagined just, I think, increases as you move down the generation scope. So, my kids do things now that I could never even have imagined doing in my late teens and early 20s, because it's just become possible for people to do these things. And it was probably possible then, but it never really was on my radar as a possibility. So, when we work with retirees, their set of goals and values and what's important to them is often very different from when we work with Generation 2 and Generation 3. And, and that's a natural evolution over time. I think eventually we all move to that level of thinking where, sustainability and legacy becomes really important. Whereas when you're 22, legacy isn't even a thought that you have at that point. It's how do I live my best life? And for some, it's how do I survive what I'm going through right now with all the chaos. So, there are generational differences, but I think it helps, with me working with a lot of Gen X or even some Gen Y people. I'm kind of in that middling range where I am Gen X, but I'm kind of near that Gen Y border to some degree. It helps having shared life experiences, having done a lot of the same things or, faced the same challenges or the same opportunities in life. And how did we navigate those? And so it just seems to be a natural fit for me with a lot of the folks that I'm fortunate enough to serve.
Kind of thinking about that, you obviously have an office, you manage, you've served on really some really cool national boards. You've also, been a planner, raised a family. How have you managed to balance all of those things? How do you think that impacts the way you help others?
Yeah, I don't think I was very good at it at first. I think you learn that along the way, quite frankly. There was a lot of travel and a lot of time away. As a professional, I missed some things. I was still involved a lot in the lives of my kids and in my family. I coached hockey for 20 years. I coached lacrosse with no business doing so. I coached baseball and soccer over the years. So I was there for a lot of what my kids were doing, but there were times where I just had other things that I needed to do for job or career or leadership positions. And so there were times missed. And I think, finding that balance and figuring that out takes a lot of time and energy and real forethought, or at least intentionality. And I got better at it over time. So, when I was home with my family, I was with my family. I was able to cut off a lot of the stuff that, like when I leave the office, I have emails on my phone, but quite frankly, I don't do a lot of financial planning stuff at home in the evening. That's my family time. I'm there with my wife or with whichever kids might be in the house at the time. And when I'm in the office, that's my office time. That's where I do the work that I do. So that took a long time. I used to work longer hours and I used to constantly, do the work from home stuff. But now I've been able to kind of compartmentalize those things and approach them in a different way.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like, and I think for all of us, like kind of like you're getting on the UTV and heading out to Moose Camp, you have a sense of what needs to be done, but over time you learn and get better at doing those things and navigating those obstacles. I think that's really often what it comes down to. So you talked about being inspired by hardworking, dedicated people, succeeding from their efforts. And so how do you help people define what that means? Like, I'm sure you have that conversation with families.
For all of us, I think that's really the first responsibility we have in working with clients, is to figure out what it is we're planning for. Like we can do the numbers part of it, the quantitative part of it. It's the qualitative part at the beginning and interspersed throughout that I think is really, really important. I use an analogy a lot of times. I'm stealing this. A former mentor and boss of mine, John Guyton, really explained it to me. But I often ask people about puzzles, right? I think a lot of people like to do puzzles. And I always say, when you do a puzzle, what's the first thing that you do before putting it together? And most people say, oh, I get out the edge pieces or I find the corners, right? And that's all true. That's really technically or mechanically the first thing people do when they put together a puzzle. But the reality is the very first thing you do is you look at the picture on the front of the box. Because without that context, you really don't know what it is you're working toward. And so I think our job and work with clients is to really paint that picture on the front of the puzzle box early on in that relationship within the first couple of meetings so that we have the context around, what we're planning for. And I think a lot of people that we work with have never really thought about what that picture looks like. Like those conversations, and I know, Jude, you love the Kinder 3 questions, right? And so using those can really help frame the conversation around what is it that we're planning? What is really important to you? Because it's not another dollar. It's really what that dollar represents or what it could do, the opportunities it might create, the legacy it could create. And so we really need to understand what that is. And we do that through Kinder 3 questions, the money quotient tools that we have, the conversations that over time we've all learned how to lead. I think those are the really important conversations with clients.
What are those Kinder 3 questions, just for those who might never have heard of those?
Yeah, well, I'll hop in on that one because I use those generally with new families, and I'll put a link in the show notes to the full document of this, because they're available on the internet. But in short, it's basically, if you had enough money for the rest of your life, what would you do? If you had 5 to 10 years to live, what would you change? And if you had 24 hours to live, what would you miss? It's a pretty emotionally intense conversation to go into. But the benefit of it is that it gets really clear on what's important. And the more I think you know about that, the easier it is to make some of the choices that are life values choices, but that have a dollar sign attached to them. So it's easy to decide what you prioritize, what you want to put your money and time towards, and then what are things maybe you don't want to, spend money and time on if you can. So yeah, but all of these are aiming to that same point that I think Mike made of, let's, get a real, right, maybe you want to retire. Well, no, but like in detail, like what is that? Let's get some sharp edges and images around what that really looks like. Because retiring and playing golf is different from retiring and traveling around Europe, or retiring and getting an RV, or retiring and taking care of your grandkids. There's a bunch of different ways that can all work. But the more we know about what that looks like for you, the better our advice becomes. And then life too is going to change that. And so how do you make pivots along the way when you find something else that you want to pursue?
I think you summed it up really well.
This ties into something else that I think was important from your bio. You talked about, keeping the big picture in mind and avoiding focusing on the short-term noise. So when you're working with people, what does that look like? Or how do you find you help them do that?
It's becoming increasingly more difficult. There's so much information flowing these days, and some of it's reputable, and the sources are reputable, and some of the sources are not reputable. And I think clients really, they hear things and they react. And so one of my jobs is to filter through some of that noise with them and really get down to, what's important to them and what's the progress and momentum that we're making towards that. And B, focusing on controlling or acting on what they can control. Right. So if you hear all kinds of, noise or news about whether it's, policy decisions or macroeconomic decisions or, what Congress is doing, you have very little control of that short of voting 18 months or 24 or 48 months from then. Right. So
yeah,
the key is going to be for most clients, okay, what can we do? What can we control in order to insulate ourselves or best plan for whatever concerns that you might have? And, I think there's a lot of stuff going around right now, right? A lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty for half of the people, and a lot of optimism and a lot of expectation for another half of the people. And there's a wide chasm between those two trains of thought. And so you'll have clients on both sides of that divide. And you need to be able to kind of navigate and manage expectations or fears on either side with what a client can actually do to prepare for whatever it is they think is going to happen. But I think the best advice is ignore it. I always tell people, stop watching it. Like just turn it off.
I'll say this because my father-in-law doesn't watch the podcast, but my mother-in-law does. And every time we go there at 9:00, he's got to go watch the news. I always think, man, your grandkids are all here in the room. Like, just be here. Like, nothing on the news is going to make you feel any better about anything. So, like, yeah, what are you doing?
Yeah, I think bona fide news is important. I think being informed is important. I think you really have to pick your sources well. And I'm not going to get political. I'm not going to, because there are both sides that think their sources are bona fide. And the reality is very few of them these days appear to be. So, if you are watching or listening to something, I think it's always good to find the other side and juxtapose those two things and probably understand that the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I don't think enough people do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, we could do a whole podcast on that for sure. It's interesting times for information. But I think this ties into where I wanted to go next, which is, market volatility is sometimes a response to just what's happening out there in the world, and because the world will change, your career and life will change. Is going to be things. So, how do you work with a family to build like a resilient, plan or mindset while you're, beyond just having kind of an emergency fund or some cash in the bank for a rainy day?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is the financial part of that, right? To have the emergency fund and to build a portfolio that meets your kind of your risk profile and your risk acceptance and your long term trajectory and goals, your time horizon. But often it's really keeping the focus on what is it we're doing in the first place. Like, remember those conversations we had when we asked the Kinder 3 questions, or when we went through the money quotient tools, and what was really important to the two of you, because it wasn't a dollar amount necessarily. It was, I want to have enough to blank blank blank, or this, that, the other. And so, if you bring it back to and refocus on what the goals are and the momentum and progress being made to those goals, a lot of times we can ease some of that fear or anxiety about, market volatility. We all know that markets are going to be volatile. I've been telling people all year, whatever the markets do, there could be political implications, geopolitical implications, financial implications, monetary policy implications that affect that. But the reality is the market is going to cycle regardless. And so we've built portfolios and we've built an approach that can handle a regular market cycle, and it can handle these anomaly events as well. And here's why. And here's where we are on a trajectory towards the goals we talked about. And here's how we got there. And if we continue to do these things, yes, there might be a day where on paper, your portfolio looks like it's worth less, but that's probably not the day that we're going to retire. And even if we do, here are the backup plans we had in place. Here are the contingency plans we talked about are built into the plan. So, the planning work that we do is much broader than what's your investment result for the year, or what's your average return over 10 years. That's a part of it. There's no question. And we need to have a portfolio that's sustainable for a lot of things they need to do. But there are other aspects to that we had to build in.
Yeah, I really like working with both of you. Like, from my position, I get to work with a lot of the different planners being on the tax team. And you both look at things slightly differently. Like, you both have different approaches on how you deal with clients and how you just think about like financial topics. And yet you both are always gearing towards that big picture, right? You both, from potentially different angles, but you're both gearing into that exact same area of, hey, what is the big picture? How, yes, markets matter, and yeah, we'll do what we can to maximize that, but what can we actually control?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things about the firm. I really believe, everybody's got a plan that, is a client here and is having those kinds of conversations, knowing that, we're going to build a plan that gets you towards where you want to go, and that, life and you are going to probably want to make some changes to this. So we'll need to understand and meet regularly and keep up with what's going on so that we can pivot when things need to pivot.
So how has the concept of retirement changed over the last 25 years of your career? I think even some of the clients we share together, as people have gotten closer to retirement, it's not just the money issue. It seems to be a lot of the almost self-identity issue. But what have you observed?
Yeah, I think even before Jude and my time, retirement was a notion that you worked to a certain age and you stopped working, and there was some kind of pension or some kind of income stream there, and you lived as long as you were going to live, and that was your life. And the options or the imagination for what retirement could look like, or even the name retirement, or the idea of retirement has changed. I have so many more clients now who it's more of a transition in lifestyle, right? So it's from going to an office every day to, I'm going to work a little bit, or I'm going to spend my time volunteering, and I'm going to do the things that are important to me. And so that's what the plan has to encompass. And I think what we're seeing with, with a lot of the kind of the younger, I'll call it, because I'm 51 years old, so everything feels younger to me these days. With some of the younger movements, whether it's the FIRE movement or just, regular Gen Z or Gen A, people like my kids, they kind of live half a retirement, half a working lifestyle now. Like their ability to monetize or make work some of the things that A, didn't exist when I was that age, but B, would never have even imagine. I don't have a good enough imagination to do what some of these people are doing these days, monetizing things like social media or, working very hard for a period of time and then taking a hiatus and traveling, or a lot of these really cool things that are doing. They're kind of building the notion of what retirement was for people into their everyday lives today. And so there's that kind of constant, we'll call it balance because it's a buzzword, but there's that constant balance between work life and recreational life, or just life, if you want to put it that way. So, the concept of retirement was an endpoint and a shift, and now it's more of a transition or just a change in lifestyle with a lot of people that never really give up working or never give up what they were passionate about and find a way to do that and sometimes even monetize it. But I think that's very different over the last 20 years than it was maybe when I first started.
I heard a comedian who said that really any conversation you're having, anything anyone's saying, you can just chime in and say, it's really all about balance. And it'll probably make sense and it'll probably be appropriate, because balance is really, it's really the name of the game. And it's fascinating to observe that even in the financial planning and retirement field.
Yeah. Well, I love that it's in the tagline too for the firm. That we do talk about wealth-life balance, because it is, what's the money for? It's for the life things you want to do. And so how do we balance making sure you got what you want and can pay for the things you need and do all this other great stuff with your life?
And retirement's a tricky thing. I mean, we all see it with clients. They don't quite know what to expect, right? Like if it is that milestone, if it's a sudden switch from work to not work, that takes time. You're not immediately like, yeah, I love this, because you have to figure out how you're going to spend your time. What's important to you. There's the mechanics of it that a lot of people don't understand. Like, where does the income come from? Well, it's not going to be very different from your regular paycheck. It's just going to come from a different source, whatever your savings are, right? And, we have funny conversations with spouses all the time. Like I hear and have heard for the bulk of my career, there are a lot of people that come in and say, I'm so busy in retirement, I don't know how I ever found the time to work. And then there are clients who say, jokingly and lovingly say, my spouse is around so much now, it's driving me crazy. We need to find something for them to do. And so, everybody handles it a little bit differently, but it's all real. And that's why our work, that kind of iterative, ongoing planning process, doesn't end on retirement day, because there's still a lot of life to happen. And maybe the conversation shift to something slightly different, to making sure they maintain that security that we believe they have going forward and legacy. But the planning work and the emotional aspect of the work we do never stops.
I think it's so keen and critical. When Caleb and I had a conversation yesterday with a client who was a surgeon and now is retired. And so one day you're healer and now you're, person at, dealing with your kids and what's going on in their lives. So it's a pretty different day-to-day life for that person. And you got to, figure out and make some meaning for that. And I always like to bring up Michelle, one of Michelle's clients had said, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch. Because sometimes there's a lot of closeness that comes after not being around all day, every day. And I already know with my wife, she's like, don't you have something to do? Like, you've been here an awful lot. I could use some alone time. So.
Yeah, Julie still thinks she wants me around in retirement all the time, but I think that might change. We'll have to see. Not an easy person to have next to you all the time. So.
Can you talk a little bit more about that transition into retirement? I know when we talked with Michelle, we talked about how we deal with transitions in general and what that process looks like. But in your experience, how are clients handling that transition? What does the 2 years leading up to retirement look like for them, both monetarily but also just emotionally?
I think it's a scary time, or at least a time of uncertainty. And so they really need a lot of conversation around, and probably some reaffirmation that the work that they've done up until that point is what we thought it was, or we are where we thought we would be. And if we're not, we need to make a little bit of adjustment, right? And so you talk about things like the emotional aspect of it, some of the things we just mentioned, like how are you going to fill your time? That matters. And maybe you're not going to figure it out until you get there, but you need to start thinking about it. So kind of the qualitative conversations that we have. And then on the quantitative side, they really do want to know, okay, where is the income going to come from? What does Caleb say about the tax impact of that? Can we control certain things? What are the opportunities we're going to have? What are the challenges we're going to face? There are clients that start thinking about, well, I don't really want to stop working, but what does my work look like? I'm going to stop working for somebody else, but what can I do with my skill set and my, unique abilities to do a little bit to monetize what I've built from a career standpoint over the years, into retirement. You have people like my dad is 75 years old. He's going to retire again at the end of the year, maybe permanently now, but we never know, right? Like people need to feel like there's something to do, and everybody has a different answer for what that looks like. And then I think from a conversational or, a couple dynamic, it really does come down to there's a lot more conversations in retirement or leading into retirement about legacy. Like everybody says, I want to spend my last dollar on my last day at some point in their life. And I always tell them it's really hard. That puts a lot of pressure on me. I don't know how to make that happen. So you're either going to have some left or you're going to spend it all before. And I don't want to go into that latter situation. So what does that legacy look like? Whether it's to charity or to family, to friends, what's really important about that size wise or structurally or, and then we talk about, well, if we think about legacy, would you rather start initiating that legacy while you're alive? Would you rather see the impact that the fruits of your labor have on the next generation or on charities? Or would you rather wait until, you're gone and give it all at once? And so the conversation shift a little bit from, are we on track to having a number, to how do we take that number and sustain and utilize it in a way that fulfills all of our goals that we've been talking about for years.
Perfect.
I mean, I guess maybe one last question, and we'll do some rapid fires, but, like, how do you think that your definition of success has evolved as you've worked over your career? And what do you think about your retirement years? We've been talking about retirement a lot. So what do you think that looks like?
That's evolving. Julie and I talk about that from time to time. We don't quite know permanently where we'd live yet. We have 2 children they're not children anymore, they're adults, but we have 2 kids that live in Minnesota. Our grandbaby, who was born a little over a year ago, lives in Minnesota. You might imagine that's tough for a grandma not to be around at all times, so that'll have an impact. We've talked about maybe being a little bit nomadic early on in our retirement. There are places we would love to visit more deeply than we can on just a regular vacation. So maybe we want to live a month in Ireland, or maybe we want to live a month in Costa Rica, or maybe we want to live a month wherever, or even domestic locations and try places out. And so that might mean not having a quote unquote home base for some period of time, and then figuring out what that looks like going forward. So we've got to keep it open for all of them. And quite frankly, I'll do whatever she'd like to do. We just got to make sure that we, think through the mechanics of that when we get there. With respect to my definition of success, I've been really fortunate over my career to have done some pretty cool things. Both Jude and I are past presidents of NextGen, which is a group of young planners with FPA. I sat on the FPA board and on its executive committee. I've traveled all over the country and to a few spots around the world, speaking to other financial planners just based on my leadership opportunities. And what I found is the biggest reason for those opportunities for me is because I surrounded myself with the right people. And when they asked, I responded.
Yeah.
I just think I've been fortunate. And a lot of those people are still kind of in my inner circle today. And I'm really thankful and grateful to have them there because they meant a lot to me over my career. I think when I when I first started out, success meant some income or dollar amount. And now I think it means impact. And I don't know that I'm not gauging what impact I've had or haven't had anywhere, but for me, that would be probably more successful than if I made, if Caleb wants to give me $1 billion, I'll take it. But what's more important is that, we have shaped the financial planning profession, people like Jude and those that we've had the pleasure of serving with, for the better, and left it better than we found it. And I think that's, for me, that's pretty important when I look back at my career.
Well, that's a perfect place for us to transition into some lighter questions. So, yeah. So, Mike, if you had to tell us what's your favorite animal, what are you going with?
Ooh, well, I would choose penguin, but I know that that's already chosen.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
that's mine. Yeah.
I don't know. I always liked wolves as a kid. They're kind of controversial, but I've always been a big fan of the wolf. The group dynamics of wolves and kind of how they approach life and survival. I hadn't given that question any thought, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. So I'll go with that.
Every person who works at TPC, or even those who do not work here, every person who's above 6'4" chooses the bear. And I thought, you being in Alaska, you might choose a bear as well, but a wolf, that's pretty cool. I like it.
Yeah, I had a bear in mind too, but I chose a wolf. And I'm not above 6'4".
Well, there we go.
I'm the short guy at TPC. Yeah.
Well, how about what do you think's the best money you've ever spent?
Any good money I've spent has been on experiences or something that allowed for experiences. I'll tell you, unfortunately, both of my wife's parents have passed. And when her dad passed, he left my kids a little bit of money, not a ton of money, but more money than they've ever seen in their life. And so the one thing we told them is, this money is really intended for education, but will allow you to use it differently if you spend it on experiences. You can't buy stuff. You're not going to go buy, whatever material things you think are important right now, because we don't think that you need that. And my daughter really jumped on that, and she has traveled around the world for now, not on that initial amount of money. It wasn't that much, but it planted this seed in her of travel and experience that she has really taken to. And I think I'm the same way. So I don't have a specific answer for you, but it would have been spending money to put yourself in a place or give yourself an opportunity to go out and try something new or experience something you've never tried before in places you may never would otherwise have gone, and do that with the people that are important to be with in those places. So
really cool. So, what the best advice you've ever received?
I don't know that I followed it very often, but it goes along the lines of, the conversation we had about blocking out the noise. And that was, don't sweat the small stuff. That is a hard learned skill for me. Like, Jude, you've known me a long time. I'm very different today at 51 than I was at 26. I think, and I hope that we all are. But also probably more laid back these days than maybe I've ever been. I've traditionally been a pretty type A person, and pretty driven. And I've been able to kind of step back from putting that kind of pressure on myself and being that level of crazy, if you will. And so a lot of that is because I've been able to take some of those small things, and my wife will tell you this, when I drive, all that goes out the window. I still get frustrated with people. I don't understand where people learn some of the things that they learn, and that's probably me, but I'll put it on them. But for the most part, I'm pretty laid back, and I'm able to put aside the small stuff and not let that get to me and worry about it too much.
Yeah, I would have said there's was an intensity about you that's not gone, but I think it's different now than it was probably earlier on.
Yeah. Self-reflection's a powerful thing. And, my leadership opportunities really changed the way that I think about things, how I communicate things, and how I frame things to others. And so I've been able to take that into both practice and life, professional and personal lives. And I think that's it's been a good shift and a good change for me.
Excellent.
Yeah, just one more. It's always my favorite one. If you had to go buy some happiness, what would you buy? How much would it cost?
I'd buy a plane ticket. I don't know where yet. Probably somewhere pretty cool. Probably for Julie and I to go, whether we really want to go to Scandinavia. We've not been yet. So maybe we would go to like Lapland or kind of northern Sweden or Norway or Finland and check things out in the winter. Iceland's high on our list. There's a theme here. It's all outdoor places. And then if you ask my wife, we're going to go to the Faroe Islands and Shetland and parts of the UK because there's a lot of sheep there, and she loves things, all wool related things, whether it's knitting or spinning. So those are on the list as well. So happy wife, happy life. I'd probably spend money on traveling to those places.
Nice. Yeah, I knew she was into like knitting and things, so I didn't realize that it was like down to the source. That's pretty cool.
Yep, absolutely.
Fantastic. Great. Well, any closing thoughts, Mike? Anything you wanted to say that didn't come up today?
No, I just really appreciate you guys doing this. I think you guys are doing a great job, and the episodes so far have been incredibly interesting, and I look forward to hearing many more. So thank you both for your efforts on this and all the work you're doing, and the folks behind the scenes that are doing the work as well.
Yeah, thanks. It's been really rewarding to be able to be a part of these and to hear from folks like you and let everybody know more about the great people we've got on the team. So thanks for that, Mike.
All right.
Well, yeah. And so thank all of you for listening to another episode of the Living Beyond the Numbers podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Jude at theplanningscenter.com. You can reach Caleb at theplanningscenter.com. And Mike is, unsurprisingly, Mike at theplanningscenter.com as well. So thanks so much. Please join us for another episode, and we'll look forward to hearing from you soon.